Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Orange Team Podcast. We've got a good show for you today, talking about VR and what keeps people's attention on the internet. We're your hosts, Leighton and Mitch. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's roll the intro.
Alrighty, welcome, and thank you for that amazing intro, Mitch. And I'm just glad to be here recording with you again. How are you doing today?
Good to be here as well. I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Doing great. The sun is shining, and it's a beautiful day, and we're ready to talk about some interesting topics today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the first one in particular because VR is something that's been near and dear to my heart, especially the applications in gaming. But if you really think about it, VR is not a gaming-limited technology. You can use it just about anywhere. Imagine companion pieces for your favorite books where you get to stand, say, in the Shire or in Lord of the Rings, getting to see the Battle of Helm's Deep in first person. Like, there are awesome opportunities for VR that I think we've only begun to scratch the surface of, and I think you wanted to talk about how Apple might be leading that charge.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if leading is the correct term. I do think that they're going to set a new precedent for what we can expect from VR. We're entering a different time with technology right now. I mean, Apple, and it's kind of a multifaceted aspect as to why that is. There's two aspects, I would say, maybe actually I'll say three aspects of VR that have been kind of holding it back. One is just raw processing power. That part alone, it's very intensive in order to make it, real, but also not make you sick. Being able to refresh the screen at a certain rate. Screens is the third one. Having high fidelity screens at the right refresh rates to, again, fool your eyes into thinking something is real. A lot of the early VR headsets, you go to use them now, they're a lot more blurry than you remember, more pixels. You can see that, what they call the screen door effect, where you're getting those kind of, you can see the individual pixels. And then the last thing, oh gosh, it was processing, screens, and
people getting their VR legs?
Yeah, well, no, it was tracking. That was the last one. Tracking
close to VR legs.
VR legs, but tracking is a huge challenge with VR headsets. Now, there's two methods. The old version and probably one of the best versions is the Mitch, what is it? It's the Vive tracking.
Yeah, that's the light station. So that's like outside in. There's inside out and outside in. And I do agree that in my experience, I've had an HTC Vive, which was one of the early gen VR headsets, and that was an outside in one with the light stations that you had to set up. Mm-hmm. I remember trying the early inside out prototypes over in the, I guess it's Meta now, but the Oculus camp. And I'm sure the technology's progressed since last I touched it, but there's something really precise about the headset being able to orient itself based on multiple light stations around the room.
Right. And I think that is, it definitely keeps it grounded in reality in the sense that there's something hard, like locked in place. It's very, most people have used it. It's definitely the best version of tracking. But I would say the inside out tracking is definitely getting better. But and the whole advantage of that, of course, is not being limited to hardware that's installed in a room. The idea that I can take a headset anywhere and just use it is kind of the gold standard of where we're going to go. So I think the outside-in tracking is eventually going to either be just completely isolated to people who have those headsets for games or in-house entertainment. But I think the future of VR is where we get out of gaming. I feel like a lot of tech starts with gaming. The gamers push it. But then we get into the realm of like practical applications, and that's where you start to see, like, think of graphics cards, right? They were primarily just for vectors and 3D rendering, which I guess they were used for movies, but now it's like all the AI and computational stuff that's happening now. Graphics cards have grown, but they've been pushed by gamers, and I think VR is the same thing. Gamers have been pushing it, but I'm seeing more. Obviously, Apple's not getting into it for gaming. I'm sure there will be games. But all the stuff they're showing is for, practical applications like business or at home or like watching a movie, or they're talking about like in an office where you can like do multiple programs. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing the future of, Apple, or just VR in general. I saw a video. I don't know if this was real or not. I think it looked real, and I think it could be one day a reality. There's a guy who was repairing a car, and he was in a Quest. I think he's using a Quest 3, and he's like looking at his car, and then he's looking to his side, and then he has like one of the like repair videos up, and he also has a repair manual all on different screens that he could look at, all within his headset. I don't know if that was real. It could have been pretty good VFX, but we're getting to the point where the fidelity could be there. I mean, I think the Apple headset could definitely do that, though I don't know if I'd want to wear one to a work site like that.
That almost speaks to a greater use case or collection of use cases for AR as opposed to VR. And those are indeed two distinct fields, even though they share a lot.
But I think that they're kind of melding. Like what used to be, I think the standard AR and VR were kind of in their own camps, right? And AR was a lot of times like on your phone, you could like look at something and it would put something in the screen. Or in some cases like Google Glass, where they legitimately had like a prism mirror that would kind of trick your eye into thinking there was something in front of you. But those things had their limitations, mostly just around the human eye and the ability to put something in front of it that close to your eyes. What Apple's doing is they, of course, being Apple, they don't want to call it VR or AR. They call it spatial computing. They got some fancy word for it, and of course that's what everyone's going to call it someday because Apple said it. But it's essentially it's VR, but they're using it like AR. Like they don't really talk about it like VR in the sense that like you're completely enclosed. One of the key things that they push is the fact that you can see the world around you, and they put insanely high fidelity cameras, insanely high fidelity screens. And then have a dedicated processor, not just for the computer part, but dedicated processor just for handling the VR tracking and immersion. And that's, I think, what they're trying to do is they kind of like, we can't figure out this whole AR thing as far as like you can see reality, but we put stuff in it. So instead, they're going to go with we're going to literally just feed reality into your eyes. And then that makes it easier for the software to put screens in there because that's what you're looking at is screens just with live really high resolution spy cam feed.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's interesting to see where the VR world is going. I think for us, we kind of look at it always from a gaming perspective because that's where we got our start with it. Right. And you kind of got me into it a little bit too because you got a VR headset before me, and I was pretty intrigued.
Yeah, it was because I had to get one for Half-Life Alyx because I wasn't going to not play a Half-Life game. I've played every other Half-Life game. I've played every expansion. I've played most of the mods that are out there. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as Valve announced Half-Life Alyx as a VR exclusive title, it no longer was a matter of if, but when. And I was already fairly interested in VR. There was a VR arcade down the block from where I used to live. And I remember the first time I went there with Matt, and we were playing Arizona Sunshine. There was a moment where one of the levels, I think it's like level 3, you enter a mine shaft. And already the game's pretty, it's a cartoony, cel-shaded almost aesthetic. But it's fairly immersive because of how you're able to interact with the world around you. Like if you want to loot a car, you have to walk up to the trunk of it and actually lift the trunk up and then reach in and grab the magazines for your guns or whatever. But there was a distinct moment where we entered this mine shaft and we're kind of heading down a slope, and it's so dark, pitch black, you cannot see. Most games would provide an ambient fill light, but this one did not. What they did provide was a couple of glow sticks and flashlights off to the side. And I remember the moment that we were fiddling with them, and that compromised our ability to hold certain weapons. And then zombies started coming up the shaft towards us. And so what I did is I said, Matt, just, grab your big gun or whatever, and I will hold the flashlight over your shoulder for you. I wasn't 100% sure yet if that would work. And in hindsight, VR being what it is, of course it would work. But there was a part of me that was still thinking of the game in terms of like classic verbs of the way games work. But of course, I just reached up and over his shoulder with a flashlight and held it, and he could see what I saw down the tunnel. The zombies fully illuminated for him to take care of. And that was the moment that VR clicked for me, where I said, this is really something magical and different. I don't believe it was that same time, but we went back to the VR arcade again and played other games like Onward, which is kind of a tactical military simulation game. There was a moment where one of us was out of ammo and we called it out to each other, oh, I'm out. I think it was him throwing me a magazine. And so he reached down to his belt, pulled a magazine out, and threw it to me across the deck of the ship. And I was able to actually grab it, pick it up, and load it into my gun. And I'm like, that's just awesome. Like, that's so cool.
I've always described VR as being like, it's not like people watch on YouTube, right? And it's like, oh, that's super cool. But I'm like, you can't just watch it. VR is the most experiential type gaming that you can do. Like what you just described, it's an experience, right? It's not just click X to share mag. It's like, no, like he literally had to go down, grab it, and then physically throw it, and then you had to pick it up and load it. And that's like, and it's something like in most, and then again, like in a lot of games, that's not even an option. If there's no button option for it, you can't do it. In this game, you're like, if you can hold it, you can do that. Like So I think it's pretty wild.
I think that, you mentioned VR being experiential at its heart. I think that that's why it can and must grow beyond gaming. You mentioned a little bit earlier on that Apple's targeting the business sector, as they do. But there's something to consider. You mentioned graphics cards and how they were drawing vectors, and of course we repurposed them for 3D graphics. Something that graphics cards were largely designed for, and I think VR will have a powerful use case for, is computer-assisted design. So in like the realm of manufacturing, like you mentioned the mechanic working on a car and having the video up beside him. What if he could pull up the schematic and Tony Stark style, blow it up and tear it apart and drill down to find the part in the engine, and he could look at the part and then look past it with his AR goggles and see the actual part in the engine and know that he was looking at the right thing, and oh yes, that is indeed broken, what have you. There's just so many potential applications, and it's interesting to me that VR just keeps popping in and out of the cultural conversation. Like, it seems like 1 minute VR has finally taken root, and there's an explosion of new VR games. Like shortly after Half-Life Alyx came out, the Valve Index was doing very well. You were seeing user numbers on Steam for people using VR headsets across, Oculus and Meta's headsets, HTC's headsets, etc. But now there's been a lull, and I haven't heard about VR in a while, and there certainly hasn't been any must-play titles coming out for VR.
Yeah, I think in the gaming sector, it's gotten quiet. I think Alyx was kind of like the adrenaline shot, but then there was not really any substance after it. Like, it was supposed to prove concept that like VR is here to stay, and I think it is here to stay. But I think that, again, for a lot of people, the barrier to entry is still so high for VR. I mean, even looking at Apple's entry, I mean, $3,500 for what it is, with very few apps available at launch. It's not. I mean, okay, I say very few apps. It has, like, apparently you can just run native iOS and stuff apps, but like apps made for Vision Pro.
Because it's going to be it's going to be like an M series chip in there, isn't it?
Is that I think it's an M2.
Let me look.
Last I checked, it's an M2, which is pretty good, but I think it's like just a regular M2. It's not an M2 Pro or Max, or because of battery constraints. I mean, it only gets like 2 hours of battery, and the battery pack has to be worn separately. It's not on the headset, which is, it had to, because a lot of people that said they've worn the headset say it's very heavy without a battery. So, because it's a lot of metal and glass. Yeah, it's an M2, which, again, for like what it's aiming for is, one of the things they show off a lot is like, hey, people watching movies, like you can be on an airplane and have like a theater level screen in front of you if you want. But like for me, the thing that always drew me in was the idea of like, hey, I could get rid of these monitors on my screen on my desk and like just have virtual monitors, just have a desktop, and then just it pairs to my computer, and I can just make as many monitors as I want. Like, to me, that's where I think it'd be kind of cool, is like, hey, like say I'm someone who travels a lot, rather than having to, I don't know, just bring screens, you can like just bring a headset and you're sitting in the hotel room, you're working on stuff, and it's like, hey, I can just have 5 monitors and put them anywhere I want in the room and be working on it.
Right.
And you can either use it natively on the Vision Pro, or you can have like a MacBook with you. Like that was kind of something that drew me in, was that idea. But again, it's not $3,500 worth for me.
Yeah.
And like, of course, I'd love to try one out, but it's gonna probably be a bit of a while before I can demo one. But like,
Yeah.
so Vision Pro is like its own category, and I think Apple, what they're trying to do is expand that market. Some people believe that in 10 years they'll get it down to a price and a size that people will adopt, kind of like the iPhone and the Apple Watch and the
Yeah.
iPad, and eventually people will replace their phones with it. They'll put cellular and stuff. I don't know if that's true, but it is an interesting theory. That's just a theory.
That's just a theory.
A VR
Well,
theory.
yeah. And there's VR is largely all theoretical at this point to some degree. I mean, we have tangible manifestations of it, but we're still figuring out what VR means and what it's going to mean moving forward. Like Meta was trying to make the metaverse happen. It's like, stop trying to make the metaverse happen. I've seen Ready Player One and I don't know if we want that,
Yeah.
But by the same token, we're headed that direction. And I think that Apple's step into the VR arena, it sort of validates it and matures it. Like, hey, Apple's paying attention now, and Apple's making a statement in VR. That's kind of a big deal. That's going to have industry-wide consequences. However, the price point, $3,500, and kind of their vague and nebulous use cases and marketing around it, they're not really showing you real distinct, like they showed you the big screens and they showed you some of the different features, but it feels like it's more about what it could be than what it is right now.
Well,
I think we're all early adopters for
yeah.
VR.
I think if you look at a lot of Apple's first gen products, maybe minus the M1, I think the M1 was probably one of the few Apple products where I feel like it was actually like pretty full featured from the get go. But you look at the
Yeah.
original iPhone, like the first iPhone, I don't remember if it got an app store. It might have with the next update, but I know that it wasn't until the next generation iPhone that they introduced the app store. It was just whatever
The
came with it.
3G.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Apple Watch was pretty basic at the beginning. The first iPad was really basic. No cameras. I think it still used the 30-pin connector. That the next gen iPad was a huge jump. I mean, I remember being at Best Buy and we saw the iPad 2s, even when the iPad 3, 4, and I think even 5 were out. Like the iPad 2 was like their entry level. It was still good. But yeah, the first gen products definitely feel like proof of concept, and they get people excited. But they don't like necessarily have to be what the final product will be. Like it's just introducing people, and I think it's also a time for a lot of people to kind of, like, especially developers, to get a hold of them, to mess with them, figure out what they want to do with them, and that's where it kind of starts to shine. So I kind of feel like the first Vision Pro is really just a public dev kit.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously people are going to buy it because they want to have the first gen. So they're going to sell a ton of them just because of what it is. And it is still pretty cool from the get-go. But I do think version 2, version 3, version 4 are going to absolutely radically change. We're going to look at version 1 and just be like, holy cow. Like, can't believe we were wearing those.
Yeah. Well, when we look back on our podcast at our very first season here, are we going to feel the same way as looking at an Apple first-gen iPad?
100%. I think people get caught up in like what something looks like at the beginning. This is like could be its own subject, but like people get caught up in like, oh, like you have to make the best first impression, and first impressions are important. So you don't want to be a slacker in that, but I do think that people underestimate that you have to kind of put something out there first to even figure out what to do next. You can't just build the perfect thing in a vacuum. And iterations of many things, like you look at, I'm just gonna use games again because that's what we draw a lot of inspiration from, but different games, like the sequels, I mean, not all of them are example, but some of them are just, they've gotten so refined over time that we have certain expectations of them now because they've added these features and these technical abilities. I'm trying to think of a good example. I was trying to think of something outside of Nintendo, but that's where my mind goes. Is like Mario and Zelda being two great examples of series that have been around a long time. Very refined series, and they've still found a way to say original. But you look at the original Mario, while timeless and iconic, there's so much that's been added to that series that makes it so much better. Whether you're talking just going to the third dimension, or just the abilities he has, or just the controls feeling smoother and the level design being more just refined.
Yeah.
That's kind of something you had to make the original first, and I think that's same with VR. It's the same with our podcast. Same with anything you create. You got to get out there and just make something, and then you can kind of. Well, now you look at it, it's kind of like. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know. You say something.
Well,
and,
we're the example, because this episode in particular, we are trying a new way to intro the podcast, but we would not have identified the need if we hadn't put a couple episodes out.
That's so true. That's a very good point. I agree with that.
So we're the case study here. We'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. Hopefully, we drew your attention in the very beginning.
Right.
So.
On that note, we did sort of change things around. Like normally, we went right into one of our meat and potatoes topics, but normally we would have chit-chat a little bit more. And maybe there's merit to that, but that doesn't mean we don't want to chit-chat a little bit. So Leighton, what have you been enjoying lately?
I'm glad you asked that, Mitch. So it's no secret, maybe to those who've been listening or know me, but I am a big Nintendo person, and I have a Nintendo Switch. I bought one at launch. And I have the expansion subscription.
Yeah.
And
Online.
which includes N64 and Game Boy Advance games and a few other things. And I grew up on Game Boy Advance as well, and they just recently released the Golden Sun games on there. And those are something I remember playing a lot as a kid, and I have a lot of fond memories. And I was a little worried because, going into it, that it would not hold up. But I am so addicted.
Yep.
It is so funny how I instantly fell back in, and the game holds up. But I do think it's somewhat held up by nostalgia. I think if you never played it as a kid, you might have a hard time pushing through some of the stuff. But I pushed through a lot of the idiosyncrasies of the game just because I have a fondness for it. But yeah, that's what I've been enjoying. It's one of those games where normally I play games on the TV and my kids love to watch. This is not one of those games. They have not really enjoyed me playing this game because there's a lot of reading, and they're not at reading age. So I kind of have to play this on my own, but it is something I've been greatly enjoying lately. So
What's funny is you remember how growing up, like, your parents they would have some music or maybe a TV show, like one of those comfort shows from their childhood, and you would see them enjoying that or, listening to that music or whatever. And maybe you could appreciate it on its own merits, but there was always that sheen of, that's mom and dad's old music or their old TV show. Your kids are going to be like, that's mom and dad's old game. Yep. He's playing a Game Boy game again,
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, the fact that the Game Boy Advanced game is like old and classic now. I mean, those things, like, there's people that can definitely, back in my day, we played the original Game Boy, or we didn't even have Game Boys, and, played Atari. And so all these
that was exactly what we have. Michelle has her old Game Boy from growing up, and it still works. And so we slapped some batteries in it, and we've been letting the kids play with it. And my son was playing on it the other day, and he looked up at me and said, "Is this the same Game Boy you played on when you were a kid?" And I'm like, "No, son, it was older." That's not even, and that was kind of a interesting moment.
It's older than Dad.
It's older than dirt, son.
Right. That's funny though. That, like, the generations that are coming up now with games, the kids are, and there's been gradient of games or spectrum of generations coming out even since we were kids. Who Fortnite is their thing, or Minecraft is the game they grew up on, and for me, still like I'm right when the Super Nintendo was kind of, I wasn't like NES, so my memories are a Super Nintendo, N64, GameCube. Right. Then I was getting close to an adult when the Wii and following generations came out, but it's still amazing seeing how your kids respond to that stuff. So. So, I've been enjoying Golden Sun. It's been fun. What have you been enjoying lately, Mitch?
Well, I'm trying something. I don't want to say new, because I used to be an avid reader, but it's been a long time since I just sat down and read a book. And I think it's time that I reintroduce reading into my repertoire. for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that I'm trying to do a good bit of writing myself, kind of around the games that I'm working on and things. And it's like Stephen King says, the best author is going to be a really good reader. But that's, if I'm being honest though, I enjoy reading. I just haven't made the time for it. And so it's time to get back on the horse. So I've been reading Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first of his year of Sanderson novels, those 4 novels that he had written in secret. Really, he wrote 5, but we only got 4.
Sounds like the intro to like the Lord of the Rings, like in four he made in secret.
I think there was actually there's a meme about that in the community because it describes 7 novels to the Mistborn fans and nine novels to the Stormlight Archive, but there were 4 that were forged in secret or something like that. It's so funny.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one who picked up on that. Anyway, sorry I interrupted.
Absolute madman.
I think that's great.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just a great novel. It's what he's describing now as one of his better introductory novels, if you're not familiar with his work. And I would tend to agree. It's written in a little more colloquial manner than most of his novels. It's kind of zoomed in, whereas some of his novels have world-spanning implications and really nutty magic systems and stuff. This one's just a little more of a story about a girl who likes cups, who ends up traveling the world on a ship. And that's all I'll say.
That is very... Just your short little description really grabbed my attention because it's so different. And it was like, wow, that's like... Sorry, I was like, a girl likes cups and goes on an adventure. Like, that's a great way to start a story. That'll get someone to want to keep reading. And
of course, there is so much Sanderson-y stuff going on everywhere you look anyways. Like, you could read that book and have never touched another Sanderson book and at least be along for the ride and understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. But as somebody who's read a lot of the books, I'm going, don't I know that guy from somewhere? Don't I know that guy from somewhere? Is that the same thing? And it's all coming together.
But don't you get, suspicious then? Like, at this point, because he does it, like, everyone's a suspect.
Potentially. And especially with the magic. Like, you can't even trust that the magic is... going to stay on the world you first saw it on. It's like, is that the same magic system? It is, isn't it? How'd they get it here? How'd you get it over here?
Sneaky Sanderson.
Sneaky Sanderson.
Well, speaking of like that attention grabbing thing though, I think that moves us on to our next topic, which we kind of touched on a little bit earlier. What grabs people's attention? And I will say, like, what you just said grabbed my attention. I really want to read those books once I get through what I'm reading now. But, I think something that has happened a lot recently in our time is the commodity that is most sought after now is people's attention.
Right.
Is one of the most valuable pieces of something a company can get is your attention. That's true. I say as someone who's worked in marketing a lot is how do you get that attention? And there's a lot of different, and every medium deals with it, whether it be with, with YouTube, with our thumbnails, try to grab your attention, books with the book covers and even the name of the book, movies with their posters and trailers, video games used to have box art, and they kind of do, but, a lot of them don't now because they're all digital, but even still, like, it's all is trying to get your attention, and people's attention spans have dropped dramatically.
Yep.
Just 10 seconds and you lose them. And it's not just, the young generation. I think all generations have kind of faced that just due to the influx of the way media is fed to us through our phones and just the nature of media in general. But, what are things that you think, I mean, obviously people use like clickbait and stuff, and sometimes it's a little bit deceptive, but like you want to earn people's attention. Yeah. But like, what are some ways that people can earn your attention, their attention, how do you think we can earn people's attention, or maybe make it more general?
Well, and that's, we can make it, because we already used an example of like our new intro. So let's talk about, kind of what we're doing to say earn our audience's attention. You bring up a good point that attention spans across the board are not what they used to be. I'm as guilty of that as anyone else. I've been getting stuck on YouTube shorts lately. In a very strange way, if you think about it, it's almost like creating a need, at least on the part of YouTube. They create a specific format that's designed to be just a couple of seconds long. But then by consuming that content and the way that they stack one after the other, it's almost like your expectations and your desires kind of get morphed into fitting that mold. And your attention gets just cut in half. It's like, it's a really strange sort of psychological thing. And that isn't to say that I think all marketing is that. I think that there are creators, whether they're painters, novelists, game developers, what have you, that are producing incredible work, but it will never be seen because they don't know how to market it.
Agreed.
By the same token, there are people who have written novels or put out TV shows or what have you that maybe the quality is substandard. You could hold it up to some other novel you've seen maybe from your writing group or whatever and go, wow, that's not even close. This novel's clearly better, but it just had better marketing. It got a better foothold in the market. People bought it, and it grew from there. So that's something that I know that you and I have been aware of is we're launching a podcast. Obviously we want people to listen. And not only that, we want to connect with the right audience. And that has been a challenge because what we think we're doing in terms of marketing, when people ask us, hey, you've got a podcast, what's it about? And we have our elevator pitch. Oh, it's about tech and gaming. What we've discovered is that that's not necessarily the case. We may be selling ourselves short in certain areas, or we may be, certain people may look at that description on the store and immediately go, oh, that's not for me. When I know for a fact that at least one, if not more, of the episodes are going to be something that would resonate with them and that would really speak to their interests.
Yeah, I think
so.
It's challenging because some of it's like analytics and algorithms and stuff like that. So like for me, setting this up, like trying to pick a category to fit us in, right? When we're putting the podcast together, that forces you to kind of fit into a niche because then the algorithm knows how to feed your content better to people. So it encourages people to stay in their lane a little bit because then it's easier to find the people to give it to and not disappoint them. But at the same time, like you said, people are complex and different, and they have a lot of different, we have a lot of different things we love to talk about. They don't all have to be tech and gaming, but you build an audience and people follow you for that subject, and then you talk about something else and then they don't want to listen. So it gets challenging, right? We can't please everybody, but I agree though that there's definitely more to us than just, hey, we talk about games and talk about, tech and things like that. And I think we try to talk more about not just the tech, like just being a news outlet, but really like the impact that has on people and like the industry and as a whole, because it's everything that comes out. It's got a ripple effect. And I think that's the thing we're interested in is the ripple effects that happen from everything that changes more than just the content itself, because this content will come and go. It'll be, today's news is tomorrow's trash. So, but yeah, it's interesting. Something. Well, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one of the most precious commodities we have in life is time. And fundamentally, we are in this arena of being creative, producing content, and then offering that content to people and saying, hey, this is worth your time. And in some cases, your money. Like if you're selling a game, for $15, you're not only saying, hey, this is worth your time, it's worth the price of admission, right? And that is universally true. The entry fee you pay to enter Disneyland, they're saying, hey, what we've got in these walls is worth your time. And it's also worth X amount of money, right? So it is not necessarily as predatory as maybe YouTube or Facebook or TikTok or Instagram make it out to be. Since time immemorial, going back to the medieval ages, or, like when William Shakespeare was writing plays, he said, hey, this is worth your time to see. And we'll charge you an entrance, a ticket to get in, and you can come see this play. In order to make it worth your time, though, everyone involved kind of has to have something to offer. And so in our case, we're trying to improve at being kind of having these public personas and talking and communicating effectively. And we're discussing throughout the week what are some interesting topics to talk about. We're not necessarily just coming into the podcast and absolutely freewheeling. Although the way we like to talk, it does tend to freewheel a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I hopefully that's part of the value. And so, what are we doing to earn our audience's attention? I think we're bringing our A game. And we don't necessarily fully understand yet maybe what that looks like. Or even in bringing our A game, maybe that's not exactly what people want. And that may be something we refine over time as we maybe iterate. This is kind of one season. I'm still calling it season 0 of the podcast. But on every major platform, they're going to be calling it season 1. What does season 2 look like? Do we do a season where we do all interviews with people in the industry? Do we do a season where we change up the format one way or the other? Or do we just keep doing what we're doing right now? Is this what's working? And kind of, is this the audience we want to connect with? The sort of people who enjoy these just conversational, maybe it's a bit of the news, maybe it's a bit of just thoughts and speculation on tech and gaming. Maybe it's about being creative, a little bit of all of the above.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It takes time. It takes time to kind of figure that out. And I think, part of our mantra when we started this podcast was kind of the just do it. Not that I'm big into buying Nike stuff, but it's the just do it kind of.
I had just taken a drink.
Yeah, I know.
Well done.
Yeah, but it's true though. It's Nike doesn't own that in the general sense. It owns it as a catchphrase, but overall, It's like, you got to go out there, and this kind of feeds into what we said into, I believe it was our first podcast where we talked about this, but
we're going to send it.
Yeah, just send it, but it's go out there and you kind of just by doing it, you reevaluate and you figure it out. And so I think we're still figuring things out. We want to definitely hear from you guys who are listening, feedback from you guys as far as like comments on YouTube, or if you're listening to us, I think you can leave feedback on Spotify, leave reviews. Or we're on Facebook. We're working on other social platforms as well, but we definitely want to get everyone's feedback. What's resonating with you guys. We still want to stay true to ourselves. We still are certain people with certain interests, and we kind of want to stay a little bit in our lane. As far as topics that we know about, I don't want to dive into things that we're super, unless we have someone on the podcast that can kind of help clarify those things for us. But
next week's topic, foreign currency exchange.
Oh, geez, the stock market. Yeah, you don't want to hear that from us. But, but at the same time, yeah, we do tend to talk about things beyond just gaming because we have families and lives and experiences that, stretch beyond that. So we're definitely looking for that. But I think we're going to learn. We're going to find that along the way. And I think the audience will kind of help direct us a little bit, but we'll kind of experiment and we'll see how things go.
Yeah, and something I think that we're going to do. I mean, this is what it is, right? We're talking about tech and gaming, and I know that we're not the only ones interested in tech and gaming. So that's our value proposition, providing the people listening with the opportunity to basically listen in on a conversation between two friends, hopefully about a field or other fields. Like we also talk about just being creative in general and putting content out on the internet or wherever you're putting it out. Just giving people the opportunity to listen in on one of those conversations. Maybe that's something they're really looking for. And as Penny Arcade once put it, I believe they got a letter from a fan who had been deployed in the military. And he said, of course, being deployed is a very, very tough situation to be in. But he found some comfort in the fact that he knew he could, he didn't always know what day it was, but if he could figure it out, he'd be like, okay, I knew that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, there was going to be a new Penny Arcade to look forward to. Mm-hmm. And that really seemed to strike a chord with Jerry Holkins, who was writing the news article. And he had said something like, sometimes the most important thing you can do is just show up and make sure there's a JPEG for people to look to enjoy Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so in our case, maybe we don't really know what this podcast is yet. Maybe it'll grow and morph over time. Maybe the most important thing we can do right now is make sure that there's a podcast to listen to every Monday.
I agree.
And that's what we're putting on the table.
I think yeah, and I think that's part of the learning experience is learning how to be consistent, learning how to show up even when it's hard or even when it's not easy. Our goal is to make this always a fun experience for us, especially because we don't want to get burned out on this real quick. We want to enjoy it. And so we try to still be, we're not, I don't know if you guys can tell, this isn't like some super high level production. Like we're just two guys talking over the internet, recording, and, yeah, there's a little bit of editing and there's a little bit of this, but, we're just trying to have some fun. But we're hoping this does grow into something more. This episode might, fade into obscurity one day, and we might be a completely different entity. But for now, we're just two guys having a good time, and I think that's enough.
Yeah. And I was going to say, it seems like another reason I was calling it Season 0 is because then it's easier to eventually disown. Once we really lock in on like our format or whatever, it's like, oh man, if only we had known that. But I mean, that's the nature of being creative. You're always going to look back and say, if we had only known or had this all planned out from the beginning, but you wouldn't have been in a position to plan it out or refine it or see it grow into what it became if you weren't in the arena, right?
But here's the thing, like, and I think this, you'll probably get a chuckle out of this, but like, when you're recommending a show to someone, you're like, okay, this show, it's super good. You just got to get through season 1. Season 1, it's okay. Yeah. It's a bit rough. But, yeah, season 2 is where it really takes off. Season 3, and I think that's kind of what we're going to be. We're going to be that show where it's like, yeah, season 1's them kind of getting their footing and stuff. If you want to trudge through season 1. But, yeah, season 2, they got it figured out. So that's I think, where we're at. We're in our season 1 or season 0. And, yeah, we're figuring it out. And so... yeah, just try to keep it light and fresh and interesting. I think, and I'm trying to think of, for people listening, if this is something that they can relate to or not. Maybe not in the podcast sense, but if, relating to something maybe you're doing in your life, wherever stage you're in, wherever job you're in, trying to find, find a joy in what you're doing, but, just, I guess, I don't know, there might be something you're putting off. Maybe there's something you've wanted to do for a while. Just go at it for a little bit and just try it, not being afraid to start. I'm going to keep reiterating this probably in a lot of podcasts because I think it's such a critical thing in people's lives. And I say this because it's something I've personally dealt with for a long time, and that's why we do this together, because we hold each other accountable. But, that feeling of like, I can't do it because I don't have this or that and that and this. 10 years ago, I wanted to be doing YouTube, but I was like, I don't have a good enough camera. I don't have good enough audio. I don't have the editing skills. Well, 10 years have gone by, and I have accumulated so much different equipment, whether it be cameras or audio or computers and software, and I've built a business around being able to do this. It's like I have zero excuses now. It's like you just got to, at some point, you just realize you are the problem. You've got to just overcome that.
Well, by the same token, equipment and tools and skills, like, you've got to use those. Mm-hmm. And really, there's nothing wrong with starting with what you have. If all you have is a little 720p webcam and like a $20 microphone from Best Buy, you can do a podcast. Mm-hmm. If all you have is maybe a laptop that you're using for homework, but you really want to make games, you could download Game Maker Studio or RPG Maker, and you could make a little game that would run on your laptop. It's about calibrating your expectations to what you have. And that is a hard lesson I've learned, because frequently you feel like, oh, I can't start until I'm at this level. Well, you're never going to get to that level if you're not practicing, and you can't be practicing without starting.
I remember an example given. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go for it.
I was saying, there was an example given to me. Oh my gosh, it must have been either elementary school or like really early on. It always stuck with me, was the idea of like, you have someone who's told to make 20 pots out of clay. And then you have one person that's told to make one really, really nice pot. The person that makes the 20 pots will probably, by the last one, will make a really good pot. And the person who has one pot will try their best and spend all the same amount of time. But I bet you the final result, I think the last pot for the person who did 20 is going to look better than the person who sat there trying to make the one.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of example I always think is you've got to go out there and be willing to make some mistakes. Magic School Bus is like, get messy, make mistakes. You
You've been
know?
watching that with your kids?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the trick, right? You got to be, and it's also not being afraid of failure, not being afraid of what other people think. Even though in this context of what we're doing, we are putting ourselves out there on the internet for people to see and enjoy and to criticize. But that's where you learn, like, okay, you got to be proud of what you put out and realize, like, a lot of the people that write those comments aren't making squat. You went out
Right.
there, you made something, you put it out there, and I think most people want to give constructive feedback and don't want to like tear it apart. So you just, you know, try and find the meat and spit out the bones. You know, when
Yeah.
people say that stuff, and then just grow from there. And you're gonna. And at the end of the day, the worst critic in the world is yourself. It's
Yep.
no one on the internet. It's always
Every
going to
day.
be yourself. So you have
Yep.
to be. But when you put stuff out, that's helps you erode away the critic in you because people will compliment and they'll be like, "That's amazing," because you think, "Oh, it's okay." Someone else would be so impressed by it because everyone's at different levels. We compare ourselves to the people that have been doing it for years and they're so good and like, "Oh, they're naturally talented." It's like, no, they finesse that skill. And
Yeah.
that's what we're doing here. Is we're finessing a skill, whether it be editing or setups or just talking. Really, that's a skill that
Yeah.
us nerds have to work on.
For real though. And on that topic, if people ask us what we're doing here, we'll just say our best.
Our best. Yeah.
What are you guys doing? Our best.
Something. We're doing something.
We're doing something. I did want to say this made me think of a quote. It's attributed to Theodore Roosevelt. I don't know. Somebody in the comments may well come in and say it's not Theodore Roosevelt. As far as I know, it is. But I love this quote, and it goes like this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming. But who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows, in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat."
It's powerful. I think people understood that more back then. I don't know if it was just, you had no choice or if it was just
Yeah.
a mindset or a culture. I think today's culture, we're so much more afraid of, getting in the arena. And I don't know how to attribute that. I think, some people say, oh, I don't know, it's our parents, it's social media, it's the phones, it's, good times that people are so comfortable. I mean, you could maybe all the above, but I know for myself, more I look at my dad, who's someone who just was not afraid to do anything. I mean, he's the kind of guy that jumped and swam with crocodiles kind of person. Whereas I'm someone who takes things a little more cautiously, and I'm like, why do I do that? And, could just be me, right? Everyone's different. Right. But there's also an element of like, I see a lot of people like that nowadays who are like me. And I think about like, what is it that causes us to be afraid to try? It's afraid to do things. And I don't know.
Well, it could be, like you said, sometimes we're our greatest critics. Due to the interconnected nature of our world now, peer pressure is alive and well and thriving. It is so easy to feel like every little thing you do will be judged by 1,000 voices.
Which I think sticks with you when you get that as a young person. I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. I think a lot of people when they were younger, they learned how to deal with that earlier on, and we're kind of bombarded with it online, like social media, worried about the likes and what people say. And I don't know, I guess we just were never taught how to deal with that. And I guess I can't speak for everybody because, this might be more of a me thing or a you thing, as far as like how we experience things. But,
right.
I guess, that's part of the journey right now is learning to overcome that.
Yeah. To dig deep, to err valiantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, so we're figuring it out. We appreciate everyone sticking along for the ride.
Yes, indeed. Do you have anything you would like to add in conclusion or closing, or do you feel like we adequately covered what we're doing to earn our audience's attention?
Well, I worry that we may have lost them a little bit there at the end, so I apologize for those who are stuck around and be like, where are they going with this? We're talking about earning people's attention, and I think we kind of trailed off there, but...
Fair enough. Well, we'll be trying new things.
Yeah.
All the time.
Exactly. If this one fails, we try again.
Yeah, we'll do new intros, we'll do new thumbnails, we'll do different approaches to the podcast. I know that we want to do some interviews coming up. I know that we want to do maybe some... how did you describe it earlier today?
Oh, just having... so we have a few people. We're part of a team. The Orange...
Yes.
Yes, and I know we're called the Orange Team Podcast. Is kind of a little bit of a hierarchy. Not hierarchy, it's a bad way of putting it. There's a few different people that we work with, primarily under the umbrella of the In Dreams, which is spearheaded by Mitch. It's his baby. Right. And as Mitch is working on different indie games, we have different people we work with, and we would love to get them on the podcast at some times. Everyone's kind of spread out, so it'll happen when it happens. But it's fun to get other people's perspectives. I think that, just hearing us two talk for an hour, we kind of lose steam, but I think having a third person could really make it more fun for everyone. So definitely let us know what you guys think of that.
That and in my mind, I see the guests as being distinct from the interviews, even though they'll probably be a bit of an interview style format, like, hey, what do you do on Theme Dreams, and kind of interviewing them. Really, I see the interviews as being a very focused episode where whoever we're interviewing, hopefully, somebody who's involved in some of the industries we're interested in, and just giving them a chance to talk, and we can ask them questions and hopefully have some maybe viewer sourced questions or whatnot for them.
Once we get people reaching out, I'd love to get people's questions or responses, and we can have maybe a little section at the end where we answer people's questions, or if you guys have interesting topics, we'll credit you with that. So please definitely get involved, get engaged. We definitely are going to be reading the comments, especially as we're a small channel at the moment. We don't get a bunch. And so definitely looking forward to that. We're kind of wrapping it up now. We're at the end of the podcast. It's going to run a little shorter this time, but we do appreciate you guys sticking around. Thank you for listening. And as always, thank you.